That's not really Charles Darwin. Darwin himself was much too well-mannered to fight faith, as I intend to do today. He was humble. He even declined to use the word atheist, saying people were not yet ready for full-blown atheism. But I shall argue today that an understanding of modern Darwinism should arm us with courage to fight what I shall demonstrate is the hubris of faith. Before Darwin came along, it seemed absurd to imagine that the beauty, complexity, diversity, apparent purposefulness of life could possibly have come into being without a designer. It required courage to contemplate even the possibility. Darwin had that courage, and we now know he was right. There are still unsolved problems in science, gaps in what we so far understand, and this tempts us to say what was said about living things before Darwin came along. We don't know where the laws of physics come from, so God must have made them up. We don't yet have an agreed theory of how the evolutionary process began in the first place, so God must have started it. Nobody knows how the universe began, so God must have made it. Wherever there's a gap in our understanding, people rush to plug the gap with God. But the trouble with gaps is that science has the annoying habit of coming along and filling them. Darwin filled the biggest gap of all, and we should have the courage to expect that science will eventually fill the gaps that remain, the lesser gaps that remain, I would maintain. Have you noticed, by the way, how often theologians love to loftively disown the God of the gaps, but they then go right ahead to invoke the God of the gaps at every opportunity? Religion stands accused today of conspicuous overconfidence and sensational lack of humility. The expanding universe, the laws of physics, the fine-tuned physical constants, the laws of chemistry, the slow grind of evolution's mills, all were set in motion so that in the 14 billion year fullness of time, we should come into existence. We are what the whole thing is all about. Even the favorite Christian bleat that we're miserable offenders born in sin is a kind of inverted arrogance. Such vanity to presume that our moral conduct has some sort of cosmic importance, as though the creator of the universe wouldn't have better things to do than tot up our black marks and our brownie points. The universe is all about me, including my sins. Is that not the arrogance that passeth all understanding? Carl Sagan in Pale Blue Dot points out that our distant ancestors could be excused such cosmic narcissism. With no roof over their heads, no artificial light, they nightly watched the stars wheeling overhead. And what was at the center of the wheel? The exact location of the observer, of course. No wonder they thought the universe was all about me. But that excuse, if it is one, evaporated with Copernicus and Galileo. Few theologians today match the arrogance of Archbishop James Ussher, who was so sure of the biblical chronology that he gave the origin of the universe a precise date, 22nd of October. Is that today, by the way? Wonderful. 4004 BC. Not the 21st or the 23rd of October, precisely on the evening of the 22nd of October. Not September or November, but definitely, with immense authority of the Church, October. Not 4003, not 4005, not somewhere around the 4th or 5th millennium BC, but no doubt about it, 4004 BC. Others, as I said, lack Ussher's presumptuous precision, but it is characteristic of theologians that they just make stuff up. Make it up with liberal abandon and force it with limitless authority upon others, sometimes, at least in former times, and still today in Islamic theocracies, on pain of torture and even death. Such arbitrary precision shows itself too in the bossy rules for living that religious leaders impose on their followers. And when it comes to bossy control freakery, Islam is way out ahead in a class of its own. Where wallowing in a sin complex is the trademark of Christianity, control freakery is Islam's unlovely equivalent. Here are some choice examples from the concise commandments of Islam handed down by Ayatollah Osma Syed Mohammad Rada Musavi Golpaygani, a respected Iranian scholar. Concerning the wet nursing of babies alone, Golpaygani lists no fewer than 23 minutely specified rules, translated as issues. Here's the first of them, issue 547. The rest are equally precise, equally bossy, and equally devoid of apparent rationale. By the way, in case you're wondering why I put scholar in quotation marks, back to the control freak rules about wet nursing and issue 547. Quote, if a woman wet nurses a child in accordance to the conditions to be stated in issue 560, the father of that child cannot marry the woman's daughters, nor can he marry the daughters of the husband whom the milk belongs to, even his wet nurse daughters, but it is permissible for him to marry the wet nurse daughters of the woman. I hope that's clear. Another example from the wet nursing department, issue 553. If the wife of a man's father wet nurses a girl with his father's milk, then the man cannot marry that girl. I suppose in a culture where a woman is the property of her husband, father's milk is not quite as weird as it sounds to us. I don't know the origin of this creepy obsession with wet nursing, but it's not without scriptural basis in the one book that the, quote, scholars have read and were made to memorize word for word as children. Quote, when the Quran was first revealed, the number of breastfeedings that would make a child a relative, mahram, was 10. Then this was abrogated and replaced with the number 5, which is well known. That was part of the reply given by another scholar to the following cri de coeur from a pardonably confused woman on social media. Quote, I breastfed my brother-in-law's son for a month, and my son was breastfed by my brother-in-law's wife. I have a daughter and a son who are older than the child who was breastfed by my brother-in-law's wife, and she also had 2 children before the child of hers whom I breastfed. I hope that you can describe the kind of breastfeeding that makes the child a mahram, relative, and the rulings that apply to the rest of the siblings. Thank you very much. The precision of 5 breastfeedings is typical of this kind of religious control freakery. It surfaced bizarrely in a 2007 fatwa issued by Dr. Izzat Atiyah, a lecturer at Al-Azhar University in Cairo. He was concerned about the prohibition against male and female collaborators, colleagues, being alone together. A knotty problem, I'm sure you'll agree. He came up with an ingenious solution. The female colleague should feed her male colleague directly from her breast at least 5 times. This would make them relatives and thereby enable them to be alone together at work. Note that 4 times will not suffice. He apparently wasn't joking at the time, although he did retract his fatwa after the outcry it provoked. How can people bear to live their lives bound by such insanely specific and bossy yet manifestly pointless rules? It is possible that my ridiculing of religion will make some people uncomfortable. Perhaps they will accuse me of Islamophobia in this case. I find it nothing short of disgusting the way the liberal left in America, people who should be on our side, bend over backwards to overlook the illiberal, misogynist, homophobic bigotry of Islamism. Presumably they do it because they think Islam is a race, and they're scared witless of being thought racist. Well, it's not a race. If you can convert to it, or apostatize out of it, it's not a race. And talking of apostasy, how utterly contemptible is a faith so insecure that it needs to threaten death to those who would renounce it. With some relief, perhaps, let's turn to science. Science is often accused of arrogantly claiming to know everything, but the barb is capaciously wide of the mark. Scientists love not knowing the answer because it gives us something to do, something to think about. We loudly assert ignorance in gleeful proclamation of what still needs to be done. How did life begin? In a primeval soup, a warm little pond, in cracks in the rocks, in deep sea hot smokers, in outer space? I don't know. Nobody knows. We wish we did, and we eagerly exchange more or less plausible hypotheses, together with suggestions for how to investigate them. What caused the apocalyptic mass extinction at the end of the Permian period, 250 million years ago? We don't know, but we have some interesting hypotheses to think about. What did the common ancestor of humans and chimpanzees look like? We don't know, but we do know a bit about it. We know the continent on which it lived, Africa, as Darwin guessed, and molecular evidence tells us roughly when, between 6 million and 8 million years ago. How and when did language evolve? Language, that supreme achievement of human evolution from which so much followed. We don't know, and we'd love to know. Maybe one day we will. What is dark matter? We don't know, and a large fraction of the physics community would dearly like to. What is dark energy? How might quantum theory and gravity be united in a grand universal theory, a theory of everything? Ignorance to a scientist is an itch that begs to be pleasurably scratched. Ignorance, if you are a theologian, is something to be washed away by shamelessly making stuff up. If you are an authority figure like the Pope, you might do it by thinking privately to yourself and waiting for an answer to pop into your head, which you then proclaim as a revelation. Or you might do it by interpreting a Bronze Age text whose author was even more ignorant than you are. I can dramatize the difference between science and theology by imagining how theologians might answer a particular scientific question. For example, does passive smoking in casinos cause cancer? The Quarterly Review of Biology is a standard scientific journal in which many biologists publish their research. I'm going to imagine that I'm editing a special issue of the Quarterly Review given over to the question of whether passive smoking causes cancer. And the first paper in the special issue is a typical scientific paper, exactly the kind of paper you'd expect to see in a journal like this. Large-scale statistical survey in Las Vegas finds suggestive evidence that passive smoking causes cancer. Now we're going to look at a series of theological contributions to my imaginary journal. Imagine that scientists thought and worked like theologians. The president of the Royal Society has been vouchsafed a strong inner conviction that passive smoking causes cancer. The editor of Nature has undertaken a close reading of the Lamentations of Jeremiah. His interpretation of the symbolic, metaphorical meaning of the text is that passive smoking causes cancer. It has been privately revealed to Professor Huxtane in a dream that passive smoking causes cancer. Professor Haldley has been brought up to have total and unquestioning faith that passive smoking causes cancer. Professor Hawkins has promulgated an official dogma binding on all non-schismatic Hawkinsians that passive smoking causes cancer. Professor Huxtane is personally offended by all strident, shrill, and polemical denials that passive smoking causes cancer. The president of the National Academy of Sciences has issued a fatwa against all who deny that passive smoking causes cancer. And finally, although it's perhaps not strictly theology in the traditional sense, students of woke studies at SJW State College will deplatform anyone who denies that passive smoking causes cancer. In 1950, Pope Pius XII, unkindly known as Hitler's Pope, promulgated the dogma that Jesus' mother Mary on her death was bodily, i.e. not merely spiritually, lifted up into heaven. Bodily means that if you'd looked in her grave, you'd have found it empty. The Pope's reasoning had absolutely nothing to do with evidence. He cited 1 Corinthians 15:54, quote, "Then shall be brought to pass the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory," end of quote. The saying makes no mention of Mary. There's not the smallest reason to suppose the author of the epistle had Mary in mind. We see again the typical theological trick of taking a text and interpreting it in a way that just might have some vague, metaphorical, symbolic, hand-waving connection with something else. Presumably, too, like so many religious beliefs, Pius XII's dogma derived from a feeling of what would be fitting, in this case fitting for one so holy as Mary. It's fascinating to see how the theological mind works. The lack of interest in, indeed contempt for, factual evidence. It isn't that theologians deliberately tell untruths. It's as though they just don't care about truth, aren't interested in truth, demote truth to negligible status compared with other considerations such as metaphorical, symbolic, mythic significance, or simply what feels right. And yet at the same time, Catholics are compelled to believe these made-up truths, compelled in no uncertain terms. Even before Pius XII promulgated the Assumption as a dogma, the 18th century Pope Benedict XIV declared the Assumption of Mary to be, quote, "a probable opinion which to deny were impious and blasphemous." If to deny a probable opinion is impious and blasphemous, you can imagine the penalty for denying an infallible dogma. Once again, note the brazen confidence with which religious leaders assert facts which even they admit are supported by no evidence at all. Truth sometimes seems to be defined as simply whatever feels right to me. And unfortunately, theologians are not alone in this belief. The Catholic Encyclopedia is a treasury of overconfident sophistry. Here's another example. The encyclopedia's entry on Purgatory. Purgatory is a sort of celestial waiting room in which the dead are punished for their sins, or at least cleansed of them, purged, before being eventually admitted to heaven. The biblical evidence for the existence of purgatory is, shall we generously say, creative. Once again, it employs the common theological trick of vague, hand-waving analogy. The Catholic Encyclopedia notes that, quote, "God forgave the incredulity of Moses and Aaron, but as punishment kept them from the land of promise." They weren't allowed to go to the land of milk and honey. And that banishment of Moses and Aaron is viewed as a kind of metaphor for purgatory. It's nothing to do with purgatory. It's a kind of metaphor for it. More gruesomely, you'll remember that King David had Uriah the Hittite killed so that he could marry Uriah's beautiful wife, whom he coveted when he saw her in the bath. The Lord forgave David, but didn't let him off scot-free. God killed the child of the marriage. Hard on the innocent child, you might think. But apparently, the fact that David himself got off is a useful metaphor for the partial punishment that is purgatory, a usefulness not overlooked by the Catholic Encyclopedia. The encyclopedia's long purgatory entry has a section called Proofs, which is interesting because it purports to use a form of logic. Here's how the argument goes. If the dead went straight to heaven, there'd be no point in our praying for their souls. And we do pray for their souls, don't we? Therefore, it must follow that they don't go straight to heaven. Therefore, there must be a purgatory, QED. Are professors of theology really paid to do this kind of thing? Enough, let's turn again to science. Scientists know when they don't know the answer, but they also know when they do, and they shouldn't be coy about proclaiming it. It's not hubristic to state known facts when the evidence is secure. Yes, philosophers of science tell us that a fact is no more than a hypothesis which may one day be falsified, but which has so far withstood strenuous attempts to do so. Let's by all means pay lip service to that philosophical incantation, but muttering at the same time, in homage perhaps to Galileo's Eppur si muove, the sensible words of Stephen Jay Gould. In science, fact can only mean confirmed to such a degree that it would be perverse to withhold provisional assent. I suppose that apples might start to rise tomorrow, but the possibility does not merit equal time in physics classrooms. Facts in the scientific sense, facts that we know, include the following. Not one of them owes anything whatsoever to the countless man-centuries devoted to theological ratiocination. The universe began between 13 billion and 14 billion years ago. The sun and the planets orbiting it, including ours, condensed out of a rotating disk of gas, dust, and debris about 4.5 billion years ago. The map of the world changes as the tens of millions of years go by. We know the shape of the continents and where they were at any named time in geological history, and we can project ahead and draw the map of the world as it will change in the future. We know how different the constellations in the sky would have appeared to our ancestors and how they will appear to our descendants. Hubris is unjustified pride. Pride can be justified, and science justifies it in spades. So does Beethoven, so does Shakespeare, Michelangelo, Christopher Wren. So do the engineers who built the giant telescopes in Hawaii and the Canary Islands, the radio telescopes, the very large arrays that stare sightless into the southern sky, the Hubble orbiting telescope, the spacecraft that launched it, and the engineering feats deep underground at CERN, combining monumental size with minutely accurate tolerances of measurement. Literally, they moved me to tears when I was shown around. Who could fail to be thrilled by our capacity to magnify every precisely sculpted detail of an ant's head? Who doesn't feel a swelling of human pride when they hear about the LIGO instruments, which, synchronously in Louisiana and Washington state, detected gravitation waves whose amplitude would be dwarfed by a single proton? This feat of measurement, with its profound significance for cosmology, is equivalent to measuring the distance from Earth to the star Proxima Centauri to an accuracy of 1 human hair's breadth. Comparable accuracy is achieved in experimental tests of quantum theory. And here there's a revealing mismatch between our human capacity to demonstrate with invincible conviction the predictions of a theory experimentally, on the one hand, and on the other hand, our capacity to visualize the theory itself. This is not surprising to a Darwinian. Our brains evolved to understand the movement of buffalo-sized objects at lion speeds in the moderately scaled spaces afforded by the African savanna. Evolution did not equip us to deal intuitively with what happens to objects when they move at Einsteinian speeds through Einsteinian spaces, or with the sheer weirdness of objects too small to deserve the name object at all. Yet somehow, the emergent power of our evolved brains has enabled us to develop the crystalline edifice of mathematics, by which we accurately predict the behavior of entities that lie under the radar of our intuitive comprehension. This, too, should make us proud to be human, although, to my regret, I'm not among the mathematically gifted of my species. Less rarefied, but still proud-making, is the advanced and continually advancing technology that surrounds us in our everyday lives. Your smartphone, your laptop computer, the sat-nav in your car, the satellites that feed it, your car itself, the giant airliner that can loft not just its own weight plus passengers and cargo, but also the 120 tons of fuel it ekes out over a 13-hour journey of 7,000 miles. We are not arrogant, not hubristic, to celebrate the sheer bulk and detail of what we know through science. We're simply telling the honest and irrefutable truth. And honest, as I've said, is the frank admission of how much we don't yet know, how much more work needs to be done. That is the very antithesis of hubristic arrogance. Science combines a massive contribution in volume and detail of what we do know, with humility in proclaiming what we don't. Religion, by embarrassing contrast, has contributed literally zero to what we know, combined with huge hubristic confidence in the alleged facts it has simply made up. But I want to suggest a further and less obvious point about the contrast of religion with atheism. I want to argue that the atheistic worldview has an unsung virtue of intellectual courage. And I'll begin with what may seem like a digression. Fred Hoyle's The Black Cloud is one of the best science fiction novels I've ever read, despite its obnoxious hero. It does what good science fiction should. While entertaining, it informs and widens thought about real science. The Black Cloud is an alien creature of superhuman intelligence which parks itself in orbit around the sun in order to feed on solar energy. Scientists eventually establish communication, and much drama ensues. As the novel reaches its climax, our scientists ask the cloud to pass on its knowledge, which is as far beyond these physicists as their knowledge is beyond that of, say, Aristotle. The cloud agrees, but explains that the flashing light code by which it will impart its knowledge is best aimed at only one human at a time. A brilliant young physicist called Dave Weikart volunteers for the hot seat. Eventually, he falls into a trance from which he never recovers and dies of an overheated brain. The same happens after a longer wrestle to Christopher Kingsley, the astrophysicist hero of the story. Human brains, even those of world-class physicists, are simply not equipped to cope with superhuman knowledge. The cloud eventually departs for another part of the galaxy on an urgent mission. It explains that, despite its gargantuan knowledge, there are certain problems labeled as the deep problems, which are beyond even its understanding. Like any good scientist, the superhuman black cloud has the humility to know what it doesn't know. The reason for its departure is that a neighboring black cloud, only a few light years away, announced that it had found a solution to the deep problems. Since that announcement, no further communication has been received, and our cloud, as its nearest neighbor, feels a duty to go and investigate. Is the discoverer dead, or does it survive to pass on the long-sought answer to the deep problems? The reader is led to suspect that the neighboring cloud died from an elevated version of the lethal overheating that killed Weikart and Kingsley. What are the deep problems for us? What are the questions that might forever be beyond our poor brains? In the early 19th century, how complex life came to exist and diversify would have sprung first to mind. But those questions have now been definitively answered once and for all by Darwin and his successors. I suppose the remaining deep questions are things like, how does the brain physiology produce subjective consciousness? Where do the laws of physics come from? What set the fundamental constants, physical constants? And why do they appear fine-tuned to produce us? And why is there something rather than nothing? The admission that science cannot yet answer these questions testifies to science's humility. It most certainly doesn't imply that religion can answer them. Science may or may not, during the next century or so, solve these deep problems. And if science, including the science of artificially intelligent robots, and including the science of evolved superhuman aliens, can't answer the deep questions, nothing can. Certainly not theology. But I said I was going to make a point about the intellectual courage of the atheistic worldview, and I'll do it in the context of one of the deep problems. Why is there something rather than nothing? Lawrence Krauss, in his book A Universe from Nothing, expounds the controversial suggestion that for quantum theoretic reasons, nothing puts a capital N on that, nothing is unstable. Just as matter and antimatter annihilate each other to make nothing, so the reverse can happen. A random quantum fluctuation causes matter and antimatter to spring spontaneously out of nothing. Krauss's critics largely focus on the definition of nothing. His definition may not be what everybody understands by nothing, but at least it is supremely simple. As simple it must be if it is to satisfy us as the base of a Crane explanation. That's Dan Dennett's phrase, a Crane explanation such as cosmic inflation or evolution. It is simple compared to the world that followed from it by largely understood processes: the Big Bang, inflation, galaxy formation, star formation, element formation in the interior of stars, supernova explosions blasting the elements into space, condensation of element-rich dust clouds into rocky planets such as Earth, the laws of chemistry by which, on this planet at least, the first self-replicating molecule arose, then evolution by natural selection, and the whole of biology, which is now, at least in principle, understood. But why did I speak of intellectual courage? Because the human mind, including my own, rebels emotionally against the idea that something as complex as life and the rest of the expanding universe could have just happened. It takes intellectual courage to kick yourself out of your emotional incredulity and persuade yourself that there is no other rational choice. On a smaller scale, it recalls to me my emotional response to a really good trick by a world-class conjurer, Jamie Ian Swiss, say, or Banachek, or Penn and Teller. Emotion screams, "It's a miracle! It's just got to be supernatural," almost drowning out the still, small voice of reason. No, it's just a trick. There really is a rational explanation. The still, small voice takes on the patient, as I imagine, Scottish tones of David Hume. Which is more probable, that the impossible has really happened, or that the conjurer has fooled you? You don't have to understand how the trick was done in order to take the courageous leap of reason and say, hard as it is to swallow, I know it's only a trick. The laws of physics are secure. Move now from the conjuring trick to the universe. Again, emotion screams, no, no, it's too much to believe. You're trying to tell me the entire universe, including my brain and the trees and the Great Barrier Reef and the Andromeda Galaxy and a tardigrade's finger, all came about ultimately through mindless atomic collisions, no supervisor, no architect. You cannot be serious. All this complexity and glory stemmed originally from nothing and a random quantum fluctuation. Give me a break. And again, reason quietly and soberly replies, yes, most of the steps in the chain are well understood, although until recently they weren't. In the case of the biological steps, they've been understood since 1859. But more important, even if we never understand all the steps, nothing can change the principle that however improbable the entity you're trying to explain may be, postulating a creator God doesn't help you in the smallest degree, because the God would itself need exactly the same kind of explanation. However difficult it may be to explain the origin of simplicity, the spontaneous arising of complexity is by definition more improbable. And a creative intelligence capable of designing a universe would have to be supremely improbable and supremely in need of explanation in its own right. However improbable the naturalistic answer to the riddle of existence, the theistic alternative is even more so. But it needs a courageous leap of reason to accept the conclusion. Some deep problems have yet to be solved. Maybe they never will be. It takes courage to go to work on them, courage to work on the assumption that despite our screaming instincts, solutions are there to be found. And we can get that courage from Darwin. Without Darwin's brilliant idea, the problem most likely to provoke throwing up the hands in despair and invoking pure magic would be the problem of life. Unless there's a divine magician in the sky, how is it possible that living things could come into existence? The speed of a pronghorn antelope, the eye of an eagle, the ear of a bat, the wing of a swift or an albatross, the brain of a mathematician. How is it possible that all this design could exist without a magical designer? That was the big one. That was the big problem. That was a problem so big that before Darwin and Wallace came on the scene, even our greatest minds simply gave up on it. They just assumed that it was magic and didn't think any further about it. But Darwin solved it with an idea of crystalline simplicity. He gave us an inspiring model for how prodigious complexity can arise by comprehensible stages. From original simplicity, we now know that all the apparently magical beauty of life and its diversity isn't magic at all. It's just physics and natural selection. Other deep problems, very deep, remain, and cosmologists and quantum physicists are working on them. But the big one has been solved by Darwin, and that success should arm us with courage to tackle the remaining ones. That's what I meant when I said the atheistic worldview requires intellectual courage. It requires moral courage, too. As an atheist, you abandon your childish imaginary friend. You forego the comforting props of a celestial father figure to bail you out of trouble. There are no supernatural arms to catch you when you fall. You're going to die. You'll never see your dead mother again. There's no holy book to tell you what to do, tell you what's right or wrong. You are an intellectual adult. You must face up to life, to your own moral decisions. But there is dignity in that grown-up courage. You stand tall and face full into the keen wind of reality. You have company, warm, comforting human arms around you. You inherit a legacy of culture which has built up not only scientific knowledge and the material comforts that applied science, technology, and medicine brings, but also art, music, the rule of law, civilized discourse on morals. Morality and standards for life can be built up by intelligent design, designed by real intelligent humans who actually exist. Atheists have the intellectual courage to accept reality for what it is, wonderfully and shockingly explicable. As an atheist, you have the moral courage to live to the full the only life you're ever going to get, to fully inhabit reality, rejoice in it, and do your best, finally, to leave it better than you found it. Thank you very much.
Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring that bell to be notified about new videos. You can follow us on social media, and if you really love what we do, consider supporting us with a donation. Links to all that good stuff is in the description below.